This is the 122nd Security Thought Leadership webinar. And the idea of thought leadership is that we analyze today what's going on, we critique today in order we get a better type of provision tomorrow. And the topic today is one that has cropped up in previous webinars, where we've been talking about this issue of radicalisation. And of course, some people have been quite concerned about what's been going on when people have been isolated at home, away from any watching eyes, with regards to being radicalised. Should we expect a massive problem as we get back to the new normal? What forms is radicalisation taking? What might we expect to emerge? Where are we with responding? What are the big questions and the big issues, and what do we do about them? Well, we've got three panelists from different parts of the world today. Nigeria, Singapore and the United Kingdom. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce the panelists. And once I've done that, I invite you, the audience, to ask questions. As you know, we invite panelists to introduce themselves, then we give them the opening statement. And then once that's done, we invite you to ask questions. You do that by using the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. So you get your questions in early, and we'll endeavour to engage them in the ensuing discussion. Now, without further ado, let me introduce the panelists. I should just say that Tochukwu from Nigeria is having trouble connecting. He has been on, but trouble getting heard now. So in the background, we're trying to sort that out. But meanwhile, let's meet our other two panelists. And first of all, let's go to Ashton. Ashton, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Ashton Kingdon. I am a PhD student at the University of Southampton and a doctoral fellow at the Centre for Analysis of the Radical Right. For the past 4 years, I've been undercovering far-right networks, looking at online far-right radicalisation. And prior to that, I spent 8 months undercover in Islamic State networks.
Goodness me, that's an interesting opening statement. Thank you very much indeed, Ashton. And Kumar, Singapore, please come and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm Kumar Ramakrishna. I'm head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And I look at radical extremism in Southeast Asia as part of my research agenda. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much indeed. And I should say one of the leading authorities on research in this area. So I'm delighted to have you both. It looks like we haven't got Tochukwu yet. He is trying to get, Tochukwu, just check you're not there in the background. Tochukwu, can you hear us? We can't hear you. What we'll do, Tochukwu, we'll come back to you in a minute. We'll see if we can introduce you. We can see you now, but we can't hear you. So you're on mute, Tochukwu. Could you just want to turn yourself off mute? Try that. Okay, we'll come back to you in a minute, Tochukwu, and see if we can catch you there. Meanwhile, let's go back to Ashton and opening statement, please, Ashton. 3 minutes from you on what you see as the big issues here.
Yeah, so my research is interdisciplinary. So I am part of criminology, history and computer science. I look at a few different things. The subcultural elements of radicalisation, the way that history is used as a weapon in far-right narratives, and the way that technology is used as an accelerant of radicalisation. So in particular, the key concerns that have been going on since I've been doing my research are obviously an extreme rise in nationalism, coinciding with events like the election of Donald Trump and Brexit in 2016. In addition to that, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had a lot of lockdowns, a lot of people spending more time online. And because of that, we have seen a huge rise in conspiratorial extremism and radicalisation, particularly in relation to QAnon. I think the studies now that have looked into this show that kind of 1 in 4 people believe in some sort of conspiracy to do with QAnon. So it's obviously a huge, huge issue. The other key concerns for me is the impact of technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning and the quantum internet on radicalisation, how we can get ahead and regulate those now, particularly before quantum technology gets rolled out. And also there's a huge rise in male supremacism as well that I am very interested in. So yeah, just a few key things that I kind of focus on there.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, plenty of things to come back to you on about that. Let's now go to Kumar. Kumar, your opening statement, please. 3 minutes from you about your thoughts on this subject area.
Sure. Thanks, Martin. I had three questions which Martin asked me to look at. The first one is, how big is the problem of radicalization, and what are the things which we should be concerned about? Well, I would consider radicalization into violent extremism to be one of the major challenges of our time. I would understand radicalization to be the process of the adoption of an extremist belief system that justifies the use of violent methods to effect political and social change. So that's where I'm coming from. And I think this is a big challenge because violent extremism has been continually evolving. 20 years ago, we were talking about Al-Qaeda and violent Islamist extremism. Today, we are talking about radicalization into not just violent Islamists, but white supremacists and even Buddhist and Hindu extremism as well, certainly in Southeast Asia and South Asia. So it's an issue worthy of policy attention. The second question was, what are the key ways in which threats can best be managed? We can talk about this, but off the top of my head right now, I would say that apart from a strong legislative framework, the threats can be mitigated through a combination of effective community partnerships, effective police and security services, intelligence cooperation, both locally and internationally with international partners, plus strong private sector partnerships, especially involving social media companies and civil society. Civil society is actually pretty important. Third question was, what does good radicalization prevention look like? Well, just to start the conversation going, I would say public education is very important. It's central, in fact. At one level, wider public understanding of what the behavioral indicators of radicalization into violent extremism looks like. It's very important. So family members and friends of vulnerable individuals need to know what are the telltale signs that something is amiss. So these are my opening comments, Martin.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. And Kumar's actually done a chapter for the next version of the Handbook of Security, which we've spoken about before. Will you cover some of these issues, and we'll bring out some of the points during this webinar. Tochukwu, can you hear us? We can't hear you, Tochukwu. We can see you now. We can't hear you. I'll ask Hannah. Tochukwu.
I can hear you clearly, but it's a pity you can't hear me.
I can hear you. We can hear you now, Tochukwu. We can hear you now.
That's wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Well, Tochukwu, perhaps you could just give us very, very briefly a little bit of details about what you do. Just 15 seconds.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do a lot of studies on terrorism and counter-terrorism and violence and counter-violence around Africa, Sahel, and Lake Chad region. And I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I've come out with a lot of results with respect to how to counter violent terrorism, especially from the below.
Okay. I think we have to concentrate a bit harder. We could catch that though. Tochukwu, just your points. Tell us 3 minutes opening statement, your views on what's going on with regards to extremism, perhaps in Africa. You tell us your views. Tochukwu?
Yes, thank you so much for making that reference, at least in Africa, because I want to do a little. Yes, thank you so much. I can hear you.
Okay, carry on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the radicalization in Africa is quite really different from other broad ranges of radicalization. For instance, your first hypothetical question says, how big is the problem of radicalization? And what are the things should be most concerned about the response? But I want to put the question this way. How big is the problem of poverty in Africa? How big is the problem of illiteracy in Africa? How big is the problem of corruption in Africa? How big is the problem of state repression in Africa? It is when you understand these dimensions of question, you understand how big radicalization in Africa. In fact, radicalization in Africa cut across all ages. And I don't want to subscribe to the idea that radicalization in Africa has to do with political ideology, religious belief, or political belief, or extremist belief. Radicalization in Africa is more of a resentment, deep-rooted anger, and prejudice against government, and a kind of disregard to personal life and disregard to government establishments. Therefore, if you want to look at it from the point of view of a response to radicalization in Africa, I think my first view about response to radicalization in Africa is to de-radicalize the security agents in Africa, to reconceptualize the problem of state building in Africa, to reconceptualize the issue of education and empowerment of the lower class citizens in Africa. I think with this point, we can now understand what radicalization in Africa is all about. But for me, 90% of Africans are already radicalized. And if care is not taken, in 10 years' time, all the population of Africans that will be radicalized will be above 100 million population of Africans that will be radicalized. And the major difference between African radicalization and other dimensions of radicalization is that most of the Africans that are already radicalized, they are not prepared to use force. They are not prepared to use God. But the central point is that there is a strong frustration from this perspective, especially from this population. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodness me. Well, those are three opening statements which put things in perspective. Let me just ask you a question. Ashton, I'll come to you, and you mentioned it in your opening statement. I would just like to get your headline thoughts, each of you, on the dangers that the pandemic may have posed in breeding opportunities for radicalization. And I wonder whether I'll get your thoughts on whether it's possible to get some sense of the scale of it until it's too late. So let me go to Ashton first, and then I'll come to you, Kumar. Ashton first, this sense of how bad could this be?
I think it's already bad, and I think it's going to get worse. I've been tracking the sort of relationship between terrorist and extremist organizations and coronavirus basically back since March last year. And I've released a few articles on sort of the way that neo-Nazis responded to it. I think that we've seen a huge rise in anti-government extremism, particularly since the murder of George Floyd as well, and in conjunction with the lockdowns. A lot of people think that that's encroaching on their rights. As well, as I said in my opening statement, there has been a huge rise in conspiratorial extremism brought about by the fact that people are just spending way more time online. A lot of people have lost their jobs and are probably more attracted to these narratives more now than ever. And the other area of terrorism and extremism I look at is the impact between climate change and terrorism. And I've just done a paper that has looked at certain left-wing terrorist organizations utilizing the coronavirus pandemic for recruitment because people are migrating out of the cities back into the rural areas. So they're definitely using that to their advantage. I think it's very widespread. I do think it's going to get worse, particularly if we see another recession from this. So yeah, I'm very pessimistic about the situation. Very doom and gloom.
Okay, I'm not surprised particularly, but I mean, Kumar, would you agree with that, or can you put a more positive bent on it?
Well, I mean, I've been looking at a situation where I'm from Southeast Asia, as far as the pandemic is concerned. I would say that we can talk about two impacts broadly, operationally at one level and ideologically at the other level. Operationally, well, I mean, because security forces in Southeast Asia, whether you're talking about Indonesia or Philippines, for example, have had to also join the national effort to deal with COVID-19 response. Some space operationally has been created for some of these militant groups to sort of carry out attacks, but I would not say in a very big way, but you can actually see that. I mean, for example, in Indonesia, in Eastern Indonesia, in Sulawesi, there's attacks mounted by a group called the East Indonesian Mujahideen against the police. And this was tied to how this group, the East Indonesian Mujahideen, which according to the Indonesian acronym is MIT, right? MIT, I mean, it's not that MIT, but MIT, right? It's called MIT, East Indonesian Mujahideen. Basically, they are saying and spreading in their propaganda that, you know, the COVID-19 is a sign from God or divine favor that we are going to win. We are going to defeat the infidels. So this is how they sort of use the pandemic in their narrative to sort of like, you know, win support. So I won't say that the pandemic has had a huge transformational impact on the threat, but it has certainly given some grist for the propaganda mill of some of the, particularly some of the Indonesian groups. You can actually see that, yeah. But the other thing which I would, agree with Ashton, generally speaking, the fact that all these pandemic-related restrictions on social activity, lockdowns, the isolation resulting from that is thus, I would say, I mean, it would have I would expect some impact as well. The social isolation, the frustration, the blaming, like, oh, this is in fact, you actually see that in Indonesia. There's some groups, some of these groups are saying that this is a China-related thing because of the, I mean, they also go online and see what Trump used to say about the China virus, and then so there is a bit of that kind of blaming, scapegoating. So that is the kind of thing that extremists would exploit in the propaganda in order to call for some attacks. Yeah. So we can see, as an analyst, I would say that these are some of the things we should be concerned about. Certainly, as far as Southeast Asia is concerned. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Tochukwu, I mean, I'm almost tempted to believe it could get any worse given the situation you outlined in Africa. But has the pandemic had any impact on turning those who are already radicalized but non-violent into being violent? Tochukwu, the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will agree a little bit with Kumer, but from two perspectives. One, from the theoretical point of view and the practical point of view. From the theoretical point of view is that before the pandemic, most African countries have been under recession, economic recession, and they have been finding it difficult to make a living. And the government has been finding it difficult to manage a stable economy to sustain the economy. Therefore, shortly after the recession, the issue of a lockdown and the issue of the pandemic comes up. And the society or the citizenry thinks that the pandemic is just a conspiracy theory, that it has nothing to do with Africans. In fact, they don't even really believe that there was any pandemic. Therefore, they are strongly resisting the issue of lockdown. And besides resisting the issue of lockdown, the palliative promised by the government was not coming to them. Therefore, at the end, the issue of lockdown and the issue of the pandemic and forcing them to obey the regulation, the protocol of regulation, is already increasing the resistance against the government. It's increasing the radicalization, the temporary radicalization in Africa. For instance, immediately after the lockdown and the pandemic, the fear of the pandemic in Nigeria, various social groups, various ethnic groups come with a lot of agitation. You hear the bandits up north. You hear this agitation for secession in the south. You hear agitation for secession in the south. All these things are the outcome of the pandemic, based on the recession before the pandemic. Therefore, it is really a major problem, and it has already called for more radicalization among the citizens.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tochukwu. Very interesting. We've got questions coming in, so let me see if I can go to the panel and start to get some questions. Ashton, I'll come to you first. And Senzig Yavas has asked about the basic steps of radicalization. Now, since all three of you are talking about different types, I'm going to ask all three of you to comment on this. But I mean, it's a really, really important one for the security world. It's the principal process by which people are engaged. Because I guess if we could think more about that, we might be able to cut it out at the start. So Ashton, your thoughts first. Where do we start to think?
I think that Kumar actually explained it really well in his opening statement about what radicalization is, the process by which ordinary people are convinced to engage in extremist or violent extremist acts. From the online perspective, I'm interested in how ordinary people are led down these paths through propaganda. So one of the models that I use in my teaching, I'm sure we're all familiar with, is Moghadam's staircase to terrorism. So when I explain it through the sort of virtual realm, it would be like at the bottom before you even get on a step. You're a normal person just casually going through your social media. Now, when you get on to the first step, you might start looking at content that you see. It might be that you're commenting on a meme, for example, you're looking at a YouTube video, then you go up a step, you might start talking to other people on those channels. And I think in terms of counter radicalization, it's really useful to try and get in and disrupt that process there before it starts. And I think that's much more effective than trying to combat it right at the very end using technological methods, so AI, machine learning, for example. But my my research looks at kind of what you might call the extreme end of the spectrum. So the neo-Nazis, the members of the KKK. So these are people that are already sort of at the end of the process of what you would call online radicalization or radicalization. And these people were not influenced by technology at all. My research has found that these are generational views, right? People don't just develop these kind of really national socialist views through looking at propaganda on the internet. These are things that have been bred through their families for generations. And the reason that they use the online platforms is because it's not socially acceptable to air those views in society. You have seen, like with the rise in nationalism, people are much more Islamophobic out in the open now. And you have seen a rise of things like that, hate speech around Muslims, around people of color, but the really anti-Semitic content, still completely unacceptable to express that. And that's why they go to these forums. So I think that it's what the other two speakers have said, it's about the societal issues. There's lots of things going on in society that need to be fixed. I don't personally think you can deploy a technological solution to deal with a social problem. And I think that's the problem, particularly with online radicalization. There's not as much emphasis on that. And I think everything the other two speakers have said is true in the West as well, in the way that, you know, the problems emerge. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Come on, over to you. And I think what Senzik Javis' question is about this process.
Yep.
This methodology that that people use. I mean, from what I just said, it's often quite a long-term, bit-by-bit process. What's your view, Kumar?
Yep. Actually, Ashton mentioned the Fatali Moghadam staircase model, which is a very well-respected model. Another model I can think of, which is a little simpler, is Randy Borum's 4-stage model. So there are 4 stages, right? So it begins with, in terms of the process, the grievance. First, there is a grievance. The individual feels it's not right. Something is bothering the guy, right? So there's a grievance. So the second stage is injustice. The guy says it's not fair. This is the point at which I would say extremist ideology comes in, because somebody online or in the real world is telling this guy, the reason why you think something is not right is because these guys are making your life terrible. So there's injustice, it's not fair. That's where ideology comes in, right? Third stage, according to Borum, is target attribution. It's your fault. One of the functions of the extremist ideology is to identify who is responsible for this particular community's problem, right? Whatever it is, maybe it's a lack of political autonomy, a lack of religious rights, whatever it is, depends on the context. So target attribution is the third stage, it's your fault. And finally, when it comes to distancing or devaluation, where the extremist ideology influences this individual, this affected individual, to start thinking that the so-called out group, which the ideology tells him is responsible for their problem. You are evil when the individual starts saying that, you know, the members of that particular group are evil because they're causing my problem. That's the point at which the transition to out-group violence occurs. And that's the point at which radicalization results in violent extremism. So this, I mean, there are different models, right? So this is one particular model, which I find somewhat useful. The question asks in terms of methodologies of intervention, where should the intervention come? I mean, there's a lot of people talk about this, but I would suggest that at the point at which the grievance occurs, public policy measures should try to suppress this emergence of grievances as far as possible, right? If that doesn't work in the second stage, injustice is not fair. This is where the extremist ideology is coming in. So counter-ideological interventions, public education, to sort of like prevent the community, the wider community, vulnerable constituencies from buying into this extremist narrative, which is maybe propagated on WhatsApp or Twitter or Facebook. That's where the battle of hearts and minds is occurring. Because I would suggest that these are the early stages dealing with the grievance generation, the injustice element, like, it's your fault. That's where the interventions should come, the policy interventions should come in. By the time it goes to target attribution and devaluation, it's probably a little late in the day. So I'll just put it out there.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Interesting points. I'm sure we're going to come back in a second. So Chuka, before we do, just from your point of view, there's this very specific point, Chuka, about the process of engagement. Is there any sort of differences here that you'd like to point out with regards to what Ashton and Kumar have been saying?
Yeah, I agree so much with Ashok Kumar. I agree with Ashok Kumar with his radicalization process, from the issue of needs, from the issue of exclusion, from the issue of frustration, from the issue of framing. That is a big issue in Africa. Framing, that is blaming the government and blaming the system. And why are they blaming the government and the system? Because the government and system are highly ineffective. And because they are highly ineffective, you see that this blame game and framing becomes widespread, and it becomes a kind of gospel, and it becomes a kind of accepted norms by the people. And therefore, if they see it as accepted norm by the people, they act on it, on the blame game on the government, because the government is ineffective and weak. But coming to the issue of response, I think that is where we have to differ a little bit. The issue of response, look at it from rebuilding the family structure, rebuilding the family stability, rebuilding the family unity. And that's, Africa is so much dependent on family unity and family responsibility. And the government is not paying so much attention, and even the issue of the radicalization policy is not paying attention to the family. They're only interested in the government policy, and the government policy is up down, not bottom up. And Africa believes so much in the bottom up. And the second issue is leveraging on the private sector in responding to radicalization in Africa, because in Africa there is so much dependence on government providing every facility. But if they should leverage on private sector to fill in the gap of the government, therefore the issue of cohesion, the issue of stability, the issue of unemployment will be taken care of, and the issue of blame game will be reduced. I think that is the point I will stop from this point.
Very, very good, Tuku. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I have to say, all this is new to me. I'm a little bit wow, is my initial reaction. Ashton, I see what we've got. This is thought leadership, and Christopher Hockey appears to be maybe taking a point opposite to some of the things you're saying, one of the things you're saying. In summary, Christopher Hockey's point is the suggestion that people are stuck at home behind their computers and will thus be vulnerable to recruitment ignores the fact that individuals have their own agency. I'm interested to hear if any of the speakers have actually seen indications of a growing online threat over the course of the pandemic beyond the theory. Christopher's point, I think, is that theoretically that may be the case, but he's not seeing it. You are, Ashton?
Yeah, I have. And I completely understand that point. That is a point that I make as well, which is why my research comes at it from a socio-technical perspective. So you can't just look at it from the technologically deterministic view that the technology is radicalizing people, right? There's something going on. I have seen it happening in terms of QAnon and also anti-government extremism, and that is concrete data of people that have been online engaging in particular forums on different social media platforms and then moving offline into either protests or engaging in different types of offline activity with different members that they've specifically met in that group. But I'd be interesting to hear actually about the other panelists' views on what's been going on in different countries, because that's an area that obviously escapes me in the online world.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go straight to it now. We'll go Kumar in Singapore, Southeast, well, Asia, really, your research, isn't it? Kumar, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something which I've been thinking about as well. Well, what I can say is, if you look at Southeast Asia, let's take Indonesia, for example, it's an uneven picture, right? You do see online chatter among some of the violent Islamist groups about weaponizing COVID-19, like going to spread it deliberately. There is a discussion about how, I mean, new groups have formed, online groups, chat groups to talk about, how the pandemic provides opportunities for attacks. But having said that, I can't really say that there's been actual real world activity as a result of the chatter. You do see the chatter, but haven't really seen real world activity on the ground. So your point about Christopher Hockey's point about agency, right? Individual agency. I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I would agree that's something you have to take into consideration as well.
Okay, just very briefly, Tochuka, because I want to get some other questions in. Tochuka, is it the case in Africa, the online issue, am I right in thinking that's less of a serious issue with regards to radicalization or not?
Oh, it is not a less issue. It is a huge issue in Africa. For instance, in Nigeria, for instance, in Algeria. In Nigeria, there is the NSAS debate, the NSAS riot. It was propelled by the online activity. And presently in Nigeria, the federal government has banned the Twitter. And what is it? Because of the influence of online activities among these youth. And remember my first statement, I said that in less than 10 years, Africa will be home of a radicalization. Radicalization in terms of use of violence. And online influence is so huge in terms of radicalization in Africa, because almost the whole population of youth who are unemployed are finding solace in use of online to tweet. We had the NSAS riot in Nigeria, and it was really propelled by tweets and the online engagement. We have the Nnamdi Kanu agitation for secession in Nigeria. It is propelled by online activity. You have the Boko Haram. It is equally propelled by online activity. But the problem is why they think it's not a major issue now is because of the significant number of people online. The significant number of people online are the educated ones, and most of them are not ready to enter into violent extremism. But the issue is going down gradually.
Okay, we've lost you, Tochuka. We've lost you. Okay, we've lost you, Tochuka. So I'm just going to pause. Then I'm going to go back to Ash. I would like to get another question in. Ashton, Glenn Kittringham is wondering about the relationship between the rise in censorship, the reduction in free speech, what he calls the cancel culture, and the rise in extremism. Now, I suppose in some ways, given what you've been saying earlier, all these must play a part. So I guess Glenn's question is how big
is already there because of the activity.
Tochuka, so sorry, we've lost you. We can't quite hear you. You're catching in and out. Hannah in the background will try and sort you out, and then we'll come back to you. Ashton, sorry, to the point about these other influences.
Yeah. Sorry, so you said censorship.
He's got censorship about the reduction of free speech, the cancel culture, and the links to the rise in extremism.
Yeah, it's really, really high. That's a really good question. You see this happening in a few key areas. The January 6th insurrection is one of the most recent examples. When you deplatformed Trump, people moved straight over to Parler. When that was taken off Amazon, they moved to Gab. Now, I was talking about this in the US at the time because there's going to be millions and millions of people that support Trump that are not far right and not extremists, right? They've probably always supported the Republican Party. They're not going to have these kind of alt-right views. Now, the problem of them moving over to Gab is a melting pot of disparate extremist organizations. You've got QAnon on there, you've got the Klan, you've got anti-government extremists, you've got neo-Nazis. So they're being exposed to these other views that they wouldn't have necessarily gotten on Twitter. And then the rise of censorship Particularly a good example is the case of Robert Bowers in America. He committed an attack in a synagogue, and he was linked to the platform Gab again. So they started increasing this censorship on what people were posting. Now, in America, they've got lots of different clauses, and these are all around the freedom of speech, the Second Amendment. This is very heavily interlinked with not only far right, but also anti-government extremism. Now, when they move, because they don't want to be censored, there was this huge kind of move to alt tech decentralized social media platforms. So that essentially means if you're on a centralized social media, Facebook platform, for example, and I see something online that I don't want to be on there, I can go to Facebook and say, there's a terrorist, extremist content here, please take it down, and Facebook, because it's on their server, can take that directly down. When you're on a decentralized social media platform, you are in control of the server, you host the content, and therefore you cannot take that content down. So there's definitely been a huge issue in terms of the backlash to censorship, people using these technologies because they want freedom of speech. And then I was doing an interview earlier actually about artificial intelligence and social media companies and taking that offline. And the difference between Islamic extremism and far right is you walk the fine line often with the right between what is mainstream, what is fringe, what people consider extreme, and the AI misses that. So there's lots of problems there with censorship. That's a really important component from my part.
Interesting. Kumar, I would like you to ask, just address Glenn's question, if you might as well. These, I hadn't expected that to be such an interesting response. I thought you were going to say it's just a range of other things. Censorship, reduction in free speech. I mean, how does that manifest itself in Asia? I would imagine that would be quite a big deal. Is it?
What I would say is, I mean, taking on an element of what Ashen just said, what is interests and concerns the analytical community in Southeast Asia is essentially the borderline between fringe and mainstream, right? Because one of the big challenges we are actually dealing with is, you know, like this whole issue of not violent extremism, right? I mean, we have cases in Southeast Asia where certain extremist clerics, they certainly create a climate of intolerance, right? They don't actually very explicitly go out and say to their followers, go and beat or go and hurt members of the out group. But members of his following would do it anyway, right? And then later, you know, when the law enforcement try to investigate, they find it difficult to draw a straight line from what the extremist clerics said to the actual violence, right? So this is one of the challenges that, so you could, I guess it's more to rather than free speech, it's more about hate speech. How do you define hate speech? Certainly in a Southeast Asian context, where's the boundary? And this is something which has really been exercising a lot of analysts thinking. You know, there was one extremist preacher in Indonesia. He was once asked by journalists, why do you say such unfriendly things? Why do you say things which, you know, create us and them thinking, right? And so his response, I thought, was very telling. The response was, I'm just a craftsman selling knives. I'm not responsible for how those knives are used, right? So, I mean, that when I read that, I was thinking about, this is one guy who, you know, actually, I would think he knows what he's doing, but he's trying to stay on the right side of the law. And I think even in the UK, you have examples like this, you know. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be my response, because I think where I come from, the borderline between fringe and mainstream discourse, you know, where non-violent extremism tips over into violent extremism, this is something which is exercising a lot of analysts.
Interesting. That'd be a good exam question, Kumar, for your students. Okay, I want to get another question if I might. We're running out of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so a minute each if you wouldn't mind. Unfortunately, we've lost the connection with Tochukwu, but minute each. Mike Cummings, and now again, I mean, let's establish it's an issue. His question is, what are the implications to controlling radicalisation when those responsible for doing so are members of and in fact support the extremist positions like law enforcement and the military? Ashton, I was going to say, well, it can't be that common. Ashton and then Kumar. Very briefly, 1 minute if you wouldn't mind, running out of time.
There is really, really, really strong links between the military and neo-Nazi and far-right movements.
Wow.
Really strong links. And this is particularly traced to Vietnam veterans as well. So there's a lot of ex-army links in the far right as well. In Germany, in particular, there are issues with the police and neo-Nazi groups. So that is a fantastic question about how do you combat this when the institutions are also kind of playing a part. But then a lot of my work focuses on institutional and structural racism as well, and the problems that come with that. So yeah, I mean, definitely an issue. We don't have time to go into how we can combat it, but yeah, excellent question and definitely a big issue.
Interesting. Mike Cummings got this question. Kumar, from your point of view, just a minute if you wouldn't mind,
yeah, sure,
Kumar.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, do you agree it's a problem?
Yeah, in fact, I would say it's not even a problem on the white supremacist side. White supremacist ideological infiltration of the security forces, whether it's military or law enforcement. Even the violent Islamist groups, they do try to infiltrate and recruit security forces in Southeast Asia as well. I mean, the reasons are similar to the white supremacist groups. Security forces, these are the people that know how to blow things up. I mean, they are the guys who have training, and weapons ability. So they are very much prized. So this is a challenge. But so the important thing is for the top policymakers to be aware of the threat of infiltration of such extremist ideas within the security forces.
Thank you very much indeed. Tochukwu, you're back. Can you hear us, Tochukwu?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Tochukwu, we've got 30 seconds left. I'm going to give the 30 seconds to you. And I'm interested to know a question from Mike Cummings about the extent to which those who are supposed to be responding, like the police and military and I suppose government officials, are in themselves supporters of extremist positions. Very quickly, 30 seconds. Is that a problem in Africa, Tochukwu? Gone. Tochukwu, we got 20 seconds left. Very quickly.
Yeah, can you repeat? I can't hear you. The network is poor. Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Just very quickly, is there a problem with government officials, the military and the police being supporters?
These are the main problem of radicalization in Nigeria and Africa. 60% of individuals, citizens who are radicalized are based on because of security agency repression, government repression. Presently, almost all the academic staff, almost all the academic people in Nigeria are radicalized because the Twitter is banned and it is used as a means of communication, is a limitation of their freedom. I think the main agent of radicalization, or drivers of radicalization in Africa is the government and the security agents. Thank you.
Tochukwu, Kumar, Ashton, thank you so much. We could have gone on. We will come back another day, I'm sure, and tackle this subject. That was absolutely fantastic. Nigeria, Singapore, and the UK, three completely different points of view based on experience of different types of radicalization. Absolutely fantastic. I know many of you write to me, congratulate me on getting good panelists, and I think you'll agree we did it today. Thank you very much indeed. Very few final points from me, if I might, just 30 seconds. Just to let you know that the OSPAs are about to close in the United States and in Benelux, so please get your entries in as soon as you can. There's still time though in Germany, Kenya, Norway and Romania. We've got the Nigerian OSPAs award ceremony coming up. The Tackling Economic Crime Awards nominations are still open in the UK. The Cyber Security OSPAs, they're open in these categories. All the supporting associations around the world are supporting that. A whole vast there you can see. do get your entries into the cyber security OSPAs. And finally to say, we're going to be back doing this all again next Tuesday, when the topic will be inspiring diversity and inclusion in security, what needs to improve and how. And there we've got the support of the Security Commonwealth supporting that program. So I very much hope to see you next Tuesday. Thank you once again to my panelists. Thank you once again to you, the audience, for your questions. You clearly asked very, very good questions, which the panelists confirm. I hope to see you Tuesday. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.